Hi, I'm Sandy Ray, founder of Sandra E. Ray CPA, where we alleviate financial headaches so that you can create a bigger impact. Today, we're going to be talking about the statement of functional expenses. Now, the statement of functional expenses is one of the four key reports that we have to prepare every year. The other ones include, of course, the statement of financial position, the statement of activities, and the statement of cash flow. But I really want to focus on the statement of functional expenses because it is essential for our organization in many ways. Not only does it promote transparency and accountability, but it's an efficient and effective financial management tool for not only our management team, but our board of directors and our external users. So at the core of this statement is basically a table or a matrix style report where we have all of our natural categories, like, for example, compensation in rows generally. And then we have those broken down into different categories. Now, our three main categories, as you know, are program, administrative, and fundraising. But we can break them down even further for internal purposes so that we can know what's going on with our various programs or grants in particular. So when we're looking at this, we're going to have to, during the year, as we're incurring expenses, be allocating those expenses to those various programs or categories, whatever we decide that they're going to be, if it's just going to be the three main ones, or if we're going to break those down even further. And the first and simplest thing to do is to look at as our expenses as they come through and say, is this directly related to one of those? Assigning the expense to a specific program or service or activity based on just what it is. For example, if we have a program service coordinator, that person only works on programs, or if we have somebody in the fundraising department, those salaries are going to be going to those categories 100%. Think of other things like printing an educational brochure, staff that's teaching, those kinds of things. Those are very easy to directly expense to the various programs, to the various grants, those kinds of things. Now, when it's not so easy, when something covers more than one person, for example, like somebody working in the HR department or an administrator who oversees all the clinical work and does some other administrative duties as well. So we're going to be looking at various ways to allocate those types of expenses, from compensation to rent to supplies. And there's many different methods that we can use. The first one is time-based, and we can allocate cost based on time that the staff is spending. That can either be actual time or budgeted time. And generally, we're going to be allocating salaries and other labor-related expenses like workers' comp and those kinds of things. We can use timesheets to track hours. We can use 100% timesheets. We can use 2-week quarterly time studies. We can use budgeted time. So those are some things to think about to make things easier for you. But if you're already tracking time, you might as well use it. Another big allocation method that we use in many organizations is square footage or space usage. Looking at how we use our space, what percentage goes into these various categories, and can we allocate, for example, rent or utilities, facilities repairs and maintenance, or maybe even building depreciation based on square footage. Another allocation method that we have is revenue-based allocation. And this may seem counterintuitive, but bear with me. This is for multiple programs where maybe they share an expense, but you do have some revenue associated with those programs. I'm going to talk about maybe a meals program. Maybe you're a community center and you provide preschool kids with breakfast, lunch, and an afternoon snack. But you also have an adult area where you provide lunch for the seniors. The same kitchen is preparing those meals. All those expenses are kind of grouped together and it's hard to separate. But if you have a charge related to those meals, you could allocate the kitchen expenses based upon the revenue generated by the senior meals and the revenue generated by the preschool kids' meals. So that's one way to look at things. And activity-based costing. Now, here is where we're allocating costs based upon either the constituents that we serve or other programmatic things that we can separate through the expenses based upon an activity. For example, when looking at marketing expenses, obviously we're marketing for many things. Maybe we've got a general marketing program, or we've got a fundraising event that's going to benefit many programs. We want to look at the activities that money's bringing in and spread that across those various areas. Or if it's an activity that doesn't bring in any money, just looking at what is intuitive as far as makes sense to spread those costs across those various areas based upon the activity. And then we have percentage based. Now, this is going to be like sometimes the last resort, but it's going to be your best guess as far as how are we spending this money, and how should it be allocated. A great example is IT. IT is very hard to allocate among the different programs. So you may need to say, okay, we're going to allocate 40% of IT to program. We're going to allocate 30% to admin and 30% to fundraising, because that's how we think we're spending the money. And that's legitimate. Just make sure that we have those assumptions in writing. And then another allocation method is beneficiary or service-based allocations. Maybe we have an activity, let's go back to the meal program. Maybe we're not charging for those meals. So we would allocate that kitchen expense based upon the number of meals served to the seniors versus the number of meals served to the kids. That's another way to do this. Of course, we have fundraising and grant restrictions. So any restrictions, like if we have a budget that says in a grant that says this grant is going to cover 75% of the program director's salary, we have to make sure that 75% of the program director's salary and related compensation expenses get allocated to that grant. So that's something we have to take into consideration. And then we have what we call weighted allocations, where we're distributing costs based upon some sort of metrics like staff size, just to kind of give an allocation into various areas. So think about maybe telephone and internet. Generally, we're going to allocate that by how many people or FTEs maybe are in the office or remotely, and then we're going to allocate that expense accordingly. And then finally, these methods can be combined. You can use a hybrid. You can say, for example, with rent, we're going to allocate rent by staff person. Okay, now we've got a staff person who we're allocating 75% to a grant. Then maybe 75% of their office space, the rent, should be allocated to that grant as well, if that grant allows for overhead costs. Or just maybe our executive director, who's obviously spending time in program administrative and fundraising. How are we going to allocate their rent expense among those three programs? So we're kind of using a hybrid of how they spend their time and square footage. So that is our indirect allocation methods to help us define our expenses and how they're spread across the various categories for the statement of functional expenses. Some things I want you to consider is that documenting the process is important so that we have that backup. So anybody who needs access to those methodologies has it and how we've done it. And honestly, if you get a financial audit, an independent financial audit as part of your annual process, you're going to want to have that for those auditors. We want to be consistent from year to year. We want to make sure that we're using the same allocation methods. The statistical part may change, like somebody may move offices or somebody's job description may change, but the methodology is the same from year to year. And if we do change, again, we want to document that because we want to be able to compare reports from year to year. And this is can be very time consuming and tedious. So there are software tools out there that can help you, depending on how complicated that you want to get and how often you want to do this allocation. I have some clients who only do this allocation once a year. I have some clients who do these allocations with every transaction. So it's up to you how you want to do it. You can do it with every transaction. You could do it monthly, you could do it quarterly, annually, but we really need to be looking at these overhead costs and making sure that they are getting allocated appropriately. So the statement of functional expenses is key in determining our actual cost of each of our various activities and programs within your organizations. It's essential for both internal and external reporting purposes. It's going to highlight where we need to fundraise. It is going to allow you to compare your activities from year to year, but also with industry benchmarks. And it's going to allow you to be consistent in reporting to those watchdog organizations. And we haven't even mentioned the 990 requires a statement of functional expenses. So I really encourage you to get started if you haven't. I think that on your 990, you're probably reporting those percentages incorrectly if you're not. And if you have gotten started, maybe you need to periodically review the process and see if there's some better ways to do it. And again, document those changes. So I hope this was helpful for you today. And if you have any questions on this or other topics, please put them in the comment section below. Of course, we always appreciate your likes. And thank you for joining me today. Remember, creating a bigger impact starts with stopping the nonsense. If you're dealing with nonsense in your nonprofit organization, we'd love to help you cut through the noise.